Hello and welcome to episode 3 of More Than Just an Itch, your essential guide to living with and understanding eczema. Eczema has a huge impact on the lives of the people who suffer from it. That goes far beyond the physical symptoms. Living with eczema means constantly having to plan and prepare. But what if you were too young to plan and prepare or even really understand what's happening to you? 1 in 5 children in the UK have eczema. So what impact does it have on family life? And what particular challenges do parents face bringing up a child with eczema? We'll find out in this episode, Parenting Through the Flare-Ups. Now, just so you know, this National Eczema Society podcast series was funded by AbbVie, Almirall and Lilly, and they had no editorial input or control over the content or other outputs. So I want to say a very warm welcome to our guests today, Katie and Sanjay Kandaparkar, and their son Sachin, who is actually just having a little snooze outside for the moment. Hello to both of you. And Sachin is 7 years old, am I right?
He's 6.
Oh, he's 6, sorry.
He's coming up 7.
Okay, I've aged him.
He's 7 going on 50, to be honest.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is that partly to do with his eczema journey?
Yeah, I think a little bit. He's learned a lot of resilience.
Quite a wise soul.
Yes,
Oh,
100%,
for sure.
yeah, for
and
sure.
patient, perhaps. A patient?
Depends what
Maybe
day
not so
you
sure.
ask, I think.
Okay. Well, let's tell our listeners a little bit about Sachin's story, about your story as well. He started having eczema when he was just quite a small baby. Can you tell us about that, how it first came up?
It was a really good one. I mean, we had very little exposure to eczema previously. I had eczema when I was a child, roughly around 5 or 6. I grew out of it. So the experiences I had as a child couldn't be applied to when we first saw Sachin get it. And when we actually first saw his face with the rawness, we almost attributed it down to the fact that he had an operation when he was 3 weeks old for something else. It was pyloric stenosis, and thought maybe it's just the stress of that. So we weren't prepared for anything like what we had to encounter over the next few years, really.
So what sort of symptoms was he showing then at first?
It was more so when he was a small baby and he was undergoing an operation, 11 days old, he had what I would describe as it looked like acne on his face.
Right.
And we were
Sort of bumps.
Yes, exactly. And it was very localised to his cheeks. And it wasn't sort of, it was more, and it kind of looked like it was distress. Sort of, you hear of people getting acne when they're stressed or tired, or and then that disappeared quite quickly. And we had a really lovely period of between sort of 2 months and 6-7 months old, possibly a bit earlier, where he was dream baby. He slept really well. And I think from his operation, he built up some of that resilience I mentioned earlier. I really thought I was winning at maternity leave. And then it was quite overwhelmingly quick then. It just seemed to come out of nowhere. He then developed really dry, flaky skin everywhere. It just flaked all the time. And then sort of that developed into open sores.
Oh my goodness. On a little baby as well.
Yeah, and it was hot weather as well.
Oh,
It was about
no.
June time, so we would have been about 6 months old. Yeah, it was just really unpleasant and really it was quite shocking, I think. The sort of speed with which it escalated very quickly.
Yeah. And did it seem quite mysterious? I mean, you said, Sanjay, you'd had eczema, but did you join those dots at
Absolutely.
that time?
I mean, because I was only 5 or 6, I do have some memories of it, but not near enough to have applied those experiences to even identifying that it was eczema.
Yeah. And Sachin's your first child, and so obviously everything was new.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So everything's a bit of a mystery anyway. And my perception of eczema had been, my sister had a little bit on the back of her neck when she was a teenager. I knew a girl at school that had it. I mean, quite badly, but sort of very localised to wrists and, typical areas like wrists and creases in the elbows and the knees. And I remember that being quite like acne looking as well. So when we had this sort of dry skin and open wounds, I didn't immediately think, oh, that's eczema. I think because of Sanjay's history of eczema and asthma, and some say they're related, I'd sort of joined the dots that way with no sort of professional medical opinion.
Oh, really? So you had that suspicion yourselves?
And then and it got to a point there where we sought treatment and advice because it was just wasn't going away. It was getting worse and not better. So that's the point at which we went to the doctors, because it did start out as dry, flaky skin, I think.
And so many babies have that sort of thing. Exactly. I mean, I had cradle cap.
Yeah, and my niece had cradle cap as well. Yeah. So, and reasonably recent, there's 3 years between them, I think, and she'd had it for quite a while. So I think it was still quite new and fresh there. But like I said, it just got very bad very quickly.
So, and at that point, you were seeking medical help?
Yes, we went to the GP to start with, and they prescribed various treatments, and then we just kept going back saying it's not worked or it's getting worse. And
so we're talking creams and things?
Yes. So, and antihistamines. Yeah. So a mixture of creams and antihistamines. And it was the one day I rang them to say he's really itchy, as in he just wouldn't sleep because he was so itchy, and he wouldn't stop moving because he was so itchy. And it was a really innocent sort of, I wasn't, can I give him some more Piriton? Was over what's prescribed. And they said, that sounds like it should be working. We need to see you again. And then I had to go and see a locum that day, and he just said, this is way beyond what we can help you with. You need to see a dermatologist. So, some people have that battle to get the sort of specialist treatment. We didn't, to be honest. We were very lucky. We got on that sort of dermatology journey very quickly, or very early on. And I think it was because it was so bad so quickly. We didn't have that sort of, okay, try this, and sort of, that's not work, try this. It just got so bad, they moved him on quite quickly. So
without a doubt, that was a game changer, because it was a lucky break. Up to that point, we were kind of in the dark, and I think that was the big turning point for us, because getting referred, like you say, not everyone's quite lucky. I think looking back, we were quite fortunate to get that when we did.
And when you say it got very bad very quickly, can you describe what sort of physical symptoms Sachin was showing at that point?
Yeah, so it was the dry, flaky skin was everywhere. So
his entire body,
apart from his nappy area. Yeah. So I think it was like a contact environment type. When it was all over, he had red raw skin. There was none of the sort of pimply rash that we'd seen previously, but it was sort of red raw. It was like sort of severe burns, or I would describe it. It was just, and then they prescribed some antibiotics to go with it as well when it got to a certain stage, but then that sort of interfered with his digestion. He was just a poor miserable child. He, his belly was hurting, his skin was hurting all over. He wasn't sleeping because he was really itchy, and it was just at that point, and they are too young to verbalise anything. It was probably the trickiest time. I'd say the eczema was at the worst, but the sort of the effect it had on us was probably at the worst as well, when he was just far too young to understand, far too young to tell us what he needed as well. So
just visibly looking at, and you think, okay, if that was me, how would that affect me? I got my eczema recur a few years ago, and enough to understand how horrible it must have been for Sachin. I mean, coming into the world as a baby, it just, and I also remember lots of things about him growing up in those early years. Just the fact that he could put sentences together when he was young. And one of the first sentences he said to me, and I still remember it like it was yesterday, we were in his bathroom applying various emollients. He was crying, and he said, "When will it stop?" And you think, if that's one of the first sentences you can put together as a child, I mean, how bad can it be?
That tells you how all-encompassing it felt for him in his life.
It's heartbreaking, just heartbreaking, really. So
it really is. And just the practicalities must have been enormous, getting him changed, a 2-person job. I guess you probably weren't getting much sleep. I mean, new parents don't anyway, right?
And to be fair, that I mean, we had those challenges as well. But I think it was one thing that, certainly did work. Both of us worked quite well together in those episodes, trying to get him to sleep. Say, for instance, it was a 2-person job for sure, 100%. I couldn't possibly have done it without Katie's help.
No, same. And it was it was such a shame as well because he was such a good sleeper for a while, when he was a baby. But in that way, you sort of think, the daily routine when it was at its worst was relentless, and I don't think that's an exaggeration.
In terms of needing to apply creams to him,
creams all the time, and you've got sort of antihistamine every 4 hours, and then creams every 5 times a day, and then you have to separate out sort of if you're putting steroid cream on and emollient cream, you have to separate it out so the ones
so
dry.
One doesn't dilute the other,
exactly. Or I was very mindful as well with the more potent steroids that. Like my hand washing was just insane, and this was before COVID at all was a thing. Just being afraid to get it anywhere that it didn't need to go, and even to this, I think I've made such a nervous about. So he's fine at applying his emollient. He's really afraid of applying steroid cream, and I think that's coming from me going, don't touch it, it's really dangerous, and don't get it on your face, and don't get it, don't consume it, and things like that. That is, I've passed that phobia on to him, I think, because he won't. I've tried to. He's 6 now. He needs to be a bit more independent and need to know what he needs himself, and he won't touch it. And that is absolutely something I've not managed very well, I don't think. Being a bit phobic about it almost.
But in order to protect him.
Well, yeah, it's a work in progress. We'll work on it. But yeah, and then sort of going back to the daily routine, was bedtime used to be a 2-person job. We have got that down to sort of a normal, what I'd classify as a normal bedtime routine, only in the last 6 months, I think.
Wow. Previously it was taking how long to get him ready for bed?
Hours,
a couple of hours.
I'd say so. So you've got bath time, you need an emollient bath, and then they need to dry off, and then there's steroid cream, and that needs to dry, and then there's emollient, and that needs to dry, and then, as we said, when he was very itchy, we'd have to stay with it. We'd stay with him and make sure he was asleep, and then say something woke him up, you'd have to stay with him again because he couldn't sleep on his own because he'd just be really itchy and alone with his own itchy thoughts. So, so when it was at its worst, it was relentless. But I guess it's seen a positive in that. When it got a bit better, it didn't seem so bad. It seemed like life was so much easier when it got better. So
that's a very positive way to look at things.
But it really was. And I think, we were talking about this sort of in preparation for today, and I forgot how Sachin has always been quite a happy child, even, in the worst periods of his eczema. But when we had a period where it improved in any kind of significant way, he was so much more content and at peace in himself, obviously, like physically and emotionally, I think. So, we'd underestimated how much it did affect him and how uncomfortable he was until those periods where you think, oh, that's, he's just so much more at ease with himself. So yeah.
Are you talking about all the sort of routines and procedures that you had to go through? To what degree were you taught those things, and to what degree did you just sort of learn it yourselves and work it out?
A lot of it was the latter, wasn't it, Katie? Because for me, everything, if you look back at everything we've done over the last 6 years, there's no constant sort of thing that recurred throughout. We were always changing. Okay, it was almost a few weeks of this, then a few weeks of something else, and a few weeks and something after that. And I think a lot of it was trial and error as well. So it did take a lot of experimentation to see what would work best for him.
There's certain ways in which I guess doctors might treat eczema, but there is no one size fits all. What cream might work wonders for one child will have quite a detrimental effect on others. And I can think of one particular that we were prescribed that actually would scream like you'd.
Oh, that's horrendous!
It just didn't agree with the skin quite instantaneously. You'd put it on and it just didn't work for him at all. But sort of anecdotally, I know it worked very well for other people. So it is.
So did you have a sense almost like, I know this hurts you now, but you kind of want to give it a bit of a go to see if it works?
We did for a few weeks, and it didn't at all.
So did you make the call to stop that yourselves?
Yeah, I went back to the doctor and said, that's not working, try another one. But it is, and I sort of got involved quite quickly with different sort of social media eczema communities.
Right.
And you can see it, sort of, it's a really recurring theme. People will say sort of, what creams work best or what washing powder works best. And there's so many different opinions. And I think one piece of advice I would give people is take on board the experience of other people, but understand that's not going to necessarily work for you.
100% agree. I mean, if you look at my own journey, I mean, I looked at when my eczema recurred a few years back, I thought, okay, I'll see what, try the same medication that Sachin's using. Of course, it didn't work. Everyone's journey is different. I know now what works for me, and it's very different to what Sachin has now.
And speaking about the sort of the social media communities and things, do you in general life, do you find that you get a bit of unsolicited advice? That's something we were hearing in episode 2 with Jack and Chloe, our adult sufferers of eczema.
Unfortunately, and it's human nature sometimes. There are lots of people who think they're experts, and they may mean well.
I think I've been guilty of it, let's be honest.
I researched everything, but I always kept in mind, right, I need to figure out what works for us and not sort of a blanket piece of advice.
Well, on a similar note, we were speaking with our medics in episode 1 about how there are so many different triggers. There's a sort of underlying genetic factor that's common to everybody, but, it might be cats for one person much more than it is for someone else. So do you feel like you have a sense of what Sachin's triggers are?
We have a better knowledge than we did, but there's no way I would say we 100% know exactly what's triggering it. There's no way.
Has he had allergy tests and things?
He has. We've been quite lucky. We did that through a dermatologist, probably the 3rd or 4th that we were referred to. And that's the one that Katie mentioned. They worked with us. I think that was the big difference between them and previous dermatologists that we saw.
And I found this with people I've spoken to as well. The issue we have with Sachin is the things that have been identified as his triggers are sort of in the environment and...
what sort of things are they?
So tree and grass pollen.
That's quite vast.
Yeah, exactly. There's 2 particular sort of compounds, if you like, that they identified from the patch testing. So the pollen was on the prick testing on the wrist, and then the patch testing he had. So he had to keep the samples on his back for 2 days, and the 2 things that they were identified from there are really difficult to identify. They come in various different guises and they have various different names. So when I've tried to get to the bottom of what exactly they can be found in, or
synthetic compounds that goes into products.
Yes, and I have absolutely gone down a rabbit hole several times trying to get to the bottom of, can I eliminate this completely? And I think my conclusion is no, I absolutely cannot.
But maybe it's helpful in a sense to understand, okay, there is something that's been identified and...
Yes.
And we've seen visible effects. So, for instance, when Sachin's had flare-ups or even his eyes itchy, for instance, we know straight away that's been down because he's been out in amongst lots of pollen or grass. We can identify those quite easily, which is good.
So so there's some environmental factors that you've been able to identify. Is that helpful for you as well?
It is. Yeah, because we know how to. That it's almost like previously where there was this thing about I don't know what to do. Now it's almost like, okay, that's definitely triggered it. We know what works in terms of antihistamines and stuff like that to give him that relief.
One thing that's really coming across to me is just how much time you've spent thinking about all of these things and sort of trying to evaluate what's going on with his symptoms and the environment and everything. And then obviously just the physical amounts of time that you've been spending with all of his kind of procedures and treatments and things. I mean, to what extent has that kind of limited what you've been able to do in your lives?
I think in many ways, really, just simple things like, for instance, Sachin has expressed several times, sometimes when he's in the water, swimming that is, we took him to Greece recently and put him into clear water as opposed to a swimming pool, and immediately said, it's really itchy, I need to get out. That sort of thing happens even now. When he was younger, it was almost like that, along with lots of other things. You mentioned about the whole washing thing, using different powders. The fact that if you're going to go away, where's he going to be sleeping? What kind of bed linen? We'd need to take his with us, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Lots of things like that would completely overtake almost like your life, because you have to think about these things.
It's a lot of forward planning.
Face painting is one that I've never let him have his face painted. Hasn't bothered him that much, luckily, but I think it's really sad. We get to 6 years old and we have to sort of drag him past the face painting. Avoid. When he was very small, I didn't go out much, to be honest. Between sort of 6 and maybe 10 months old, when we got a bit of a handle on it, it was just hard. It was just really tiring, and I just And I felt really frustrated that I would spend a lot of my energy and a lot of my day trying to stop him scratching and things. And if you went out and took your eye off the ball for a minute, he'd really scratch and you'd be back at square one the next day. So I thought, well, it's just easier not to go out.
What
So
about returning to work after you'd had him?
That was about 10 months old. He was still quite bad then, but we had felt the benefit of the treatment that the dermatologist had put us on initially then. So they returned to work. However, when we've been sort of talking about this podcast, I changed my career. I sort of took a totally different direction when Sachin was 2. And I wonder now, I wouldn't have said it at the time, but I do wonder now if it was a factor in my decision making, really, because it was really time consuming. And we had a nursery at the time that we had used. So they are the mitts, like the bolero jacket with the silk mitts. We'd use those, and they were a godsend. They really helped us sort of improve things like being able to go out and not worrying about him scratching too much. And when we got to nursery, we were mindful at home. We didn't want them on all the time. With a first child, we were very sort of fine motor skills. He's not going to have any if he wears these mitts all the time. But we'd said to nursery, we appreciate he's not the only child here. If you need them on all day, leave them on all day. It's fine. We understand. And then he came home after a few weeks. He just scratched himself everywhere. And I didn't really understand, because we'd said, leave them on all day if you need to. And they just hadn't. And they'd not watched him. And that set us back, I'd say, like a significant amount of time in trying to sort of, let those scratches hit. And they were significant. I was horrified. So it was things like that. And it's just an extra, going back to work after having a baby is hard. Yeah. Similar to saying sort of having a newborn is hard anyway, but you add that extra factor. And it just feels really overwhelming sometimes. And, I would say we have a good support network, but I don't think anybody really understood and got to the bottom of how much time and energy of Sanjay of ours, how much energy it took for us to manage it, as well as normal daily life. So and I think sometimes people, when they knew what we did and how we managed Sachin's eczema, thought we were a bit bonkers, to be honest, because we were so much time, and then we do this and then we do this.
Well, I was going to say, one of the big things that's come out of doing these podcasts for me is understanding the difference in awareness and education levels about eczema between people who have it and their very close families, and then the whole of the rest of the general population. Did you feel like you had to do some degree of that sort of educating of people? I mean, even perhaps with his nursery, with school?
Yeah, and they were good, really good. I think, again, we were quite fortunate, particularly where Sachin is at school now. They're quite experienced in terms of the way they listen and have taken the time to take steps to mitigate his symptoms when required. Just little things like, for instance, when sending him into school, we'd rather than have to take the emollient and apply it by hand, we'd send them little pumps like that, which were really helpful for them as well, to apply that cream on.
So they were getting the right dosage.
Exactly, as well.
So we might have some, school teachers, caregivers who are listening to these podcasts. I hope so, in any case. And, of course, they come across children with all sorts of different things going on. What would you say to someone who's unsure, perhaps, about how to deal with a child in their care who has eczema?
So the first thing is, there's no one size fits all in terms of answers. So don't ever knock yourself if you can't get it right. It took us a while to understand it for a start, and then get to the right solutions that work for Sachin. I'm sure lots of teachers and carers will feel under pressure to say, okay, what's the right solution? It's a learning process. Just, do your best. I'd say more than anything, listen to the parents. They probably have the best experience in terms of what they've found works best for them.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say for teachers, I'd try and understand their triggers if the parent or caregiver knows them. And then for parents and caregivers, I think a really important piece of advice is go into the school, look at their allergy policies and understand, because I think there's sort of, not an overestimation, that's the wrong word, but I think there's sort of, we have one child and we can focus all our attention on that child. And I think there needs to be an understanding that teachers have 20 odd if they're lucky, 30 odd kids sometimes.
And they're trying to actually get information into their little brains.
Exactly.
And teach them
they
things,
have an actual
which is their actual job
to do. So I think you need to sort of have that open that relationship and look at that when you're looking at a school. Maybe that be a factor in your decision-making process.
And, speaking about teaching and imparting information, obviously Sachin has had eczema his whole life, so he's known about it in that sense. What have you been able to explain to him about it, and what questions has he had?
He's been really good, I'll be honest with you. I think it's almost like his level of acceptance for a 6-year-old, I just think we've been quite fortunate. He will ask the right questions. He's great in terms of Kate's mentioned about he knows how to what sort of situations he needs to be a bit more independent to apply certain creams, obviously not the steroid creams. Hopefully he'll get there. But I think he's what more than anything, I think he's good because he's accepted almost, right? This is something that I've got. Mm-hmm. Other people are not so fortunate with other conditions and everyone's different. I think a lot of it is just down to acceptance and learning how to deal with it. And, he does have his questions, why is it, particularly when he first had it, it was all the why me and stuff. And there's no right answer again there, isn't it? You're trying to parent in the best way you can.
I mean, I'm sure there are times when you have to answer one of his questions by saying the honest answer is I do not know.
Every day, and not just about eczema, to be honest.
Right.
No, and he says, and he'll ask sort of, why do I have to put this cream on, and when will I not have to put this cream on? And I don't know the answer to those questions, and we just say, it's not fair, and it's not fun. It's really boring putting these creams on. I get it. It doesn't feel nice, and I've never really had a definitive answer for him. Just I'm really sorry. It's not fair, but it's something we've got to do, and it makes your skin better, hopefully. He's got quite a good understanding because he has not eczema related. He has like an intolerance to egg, which is a bit more like an IBS thing rather than a skin condition. And he's very aware of it. Sort of, has this got egg in it? Has this got egg in it? This hasn't got egg in it. So and we did wonder if that was triggering the eczema. It wasn't, because we've eliminated it for so long. Like there's no way it's related, because he just doesn't have anything with it in. I think I would call it, unfortunately, resigned now to the cream. He doesn't like the creams. And that is getting more apparent as he gets older. I think he was a bit more tolerant of it when he was younger, and he didn't know any better. And when they learned to say no, that's when you've got problems.
A lot of very small children, that's the one word that they love the most, in fact.
Indeed. We are fortunate. He will do it. We've never really had a massive battle about it, so we're very grateful for that.
Absolutely.
Now, we've talked about school. We've alluded to holidays. What's a holiday like with a child who suffers from very severe eczema?
So recently we went to Greece on holiday, and I think it'd be fair to say we were a little bit more complacent than before. So in previous years, for sure, when he was a lot worse than what he is now, we mentioned about things like taking bed linen, making sure we've got all the creams, making sure we've got everything we need.
That's not necessarily very practical, even.
Of course it isn't. And I think because it's got better over the last year, particularly last 6 months for sure, we became complacent a bit and thought, okay, right, we'd be okay. We were wrong. And sure enough, when we got there, he had little flare-ups, particularly under his near his arms and legs and behind the knees. And what we said to ourselves, why didn't we bring the cream? It's just silly thing to do, really silly thing to do. We were quite fortunate, lucky, that Katie has a very good social sort of presence and was able to message people on a group of people who were at the same hotel.
Wow.
And fortunately, and somebody had the right emollient. So again, we were very lucky in that situation, but it just reminded us that we, don't be complacent. If things get better, it's you still got to take steps to make sure you mitigate those symptoms when they recur. And I should know better because I get it myself. So we learn, again, it's a learning experience. You learn through experience, you make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes.
I was going to say, don't be
Absolutely.
too harsh on
Absolutely.
yourself.
And it's an ongoing learning, because one thing we were told by my favourite dermatologist, the last one we went to see, who's lovely, he likened sort of emollients to the conditioner you use for your hair. So he said, you put on a conditioner and it makes your hair look really glossy and really lovely, and then after 6 months it kind of loses its efficacy.
Oh,
He said emollient's very like that. So he
Really?
said if you feel like,
like your skin gets used to it.
yes, and I think there's certainly arguments against that as well, I think, but
Yeah.
it made sense to me,
Yeah.
because that actually does happen to my hair with conditioner.
Same.
So, we've had one now that's worked for us very well for a couple of years, but I wouldn't hesitate to change and try another one if I felt like it wasn't working for him. Just going back to the holidays, this is how extreme we were for a while. Sachin needed emollient baths, and we went to see Sanjay's parents in India, and I took a rubber duck bath with me, like an inflatable bath, because Sanjay's parents have 2 showers, they don't have a bath. And we were touring hotels and things, so we weren't sure if they had a bath. So I took, I've got pictures of Sachin in a rubber duck inflatable bath in India, because, that's the lengths we felt we had to go to.
At least it made it fun for him.
Yeah, he liked it.
Yeah. So you can make it into a game.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'd have an extra almost bag or suitcase with
Washing powders.
stuff in. Washing powder,
absolutely.
towels, linen, spare sort of every cream that we had available to us at the time.
Hypoallergenic teddy bear, that sort of thing.
Yes, the teddy bear.
Hypoallergenic teddy bear.
Yes, we had one of
Supposedly,
those,
yeah.
and it went in the freezer once a week.
Oh, wow.
As per instructions one dermatologist gave us.
So this is to get rid of dust mites or...
Yes, exactly, eliminate dust.
Yeah.
And so, one dermatologist told us one teddy bear in the room, which seems really severe with a 1-year-old, 18 months I think he was at the time. And
Some
you think,
adults have bedrooms full of teddy bears.
Right. So, we did. We followed his instructions. And we had the one there, and it had to go in the freezer every week. And I think for a time, I thought Sachin might be a bit traumatised by putting his teddy bear in the
Yes.
freezer once a week. But then we kind of made that into a game.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
he
did,
needs to
didn't
go
we?
for a little hibernation.
Yeah.
So he was aware of it. So that was one piece of advice. And then got scuppered when he found the stash of teddy bears in the
In the spare
cupboard.
room.
Yeah,
Oh,
in the spare room
no.
after that. So
Teddy Mageddon.
yes.
Did it cause a flare-up?
To be honest, it was so up and down at the time.
Right.
It may
It was
very
hard
well
to
have
say.
done.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of got to the stage with it where we thought, we don't know what's causing it. It's so unpredictable.
Yeah.
We kind of got on with it in the end.
So we've talked a lot about, treating Sachin and his relationships with other people, educators and things. Without getting too personal, what about your relationship between you two? Because, it sounds exhausting and it's a heck of a team effort.
I would be the first one to admit it was a lot harder for Katie. Could you imagine when Sachin's first born, I had 2 weeks, I think, parental leave. Katie was on maternal leave for, you say 10 months, wasn't it, before you went back. Imagine not just about the challenges of having to parent for our first child, but all these other challenges that came along with that. Looking back, I felt like, Katie's done so much in that time on her own. Deserves so much more credit than she's, talking about herself is quite modest. But I think it was a lot harder for Katie. Yes, we'd worked as a team in the evenings, which is great until you talked about those 2-hour periods, and that worked well first thing in the morning. But during the day, Katie was very much on her own. So it would have had a bit of a strain. And
It sounds like you're feeling some guilt about
I do,
that.
yeah, of course I do, yeah, for sure. Looking back and how bad it was and stuff, I'd want to do more, but unfortunately the sort of things that happen in life prevent you from doing that. So you've got to focus on your job and
the laws on how much leave the second parent gets, they are as they are, aren't they? You say, it's up 2 weeks.
If I wanted to take more, I couldn't have possibly been prepared to say, okay, this is why I want to take. We only found out what eczema was a few months in. So,
Like my own perception of eczema before we had Sachin, it's not a life-threatening condition, but it is certainly it is life-altering when it's severe. And we were never at the point where I think Sachin's was sort of moderately severe, I would describe it as. It sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, but he wasn't. I've heard of children having it much worse. So, and
in
being
the sense
prescribed much more severe medication for
immune
things.
suppressants and things.
Exactly. Yeah. So we were given very potent topical steroids, and which didn't work sometimes, but we never got to the point where he was hospitalised, fortunately. And we never got to the point where they did look at that sort of more serious medication. But even saying that, so that's not the worst it can be, and it was it had a dramatic impact on the way we lived our life.
Even down to things like how much sleep you're getting and how you dispatch tasks between yourselves, or the amount of time you get in the evening. If you're doing a 2-hour bedtime with a small child, how much time did that leave you for a little chill out?
We've only just started watching films again in the evening.
Right.
It's not even joking, is it?
No, we're not. We would judge films previously on whether they were less than an hour and a half long or not, because I just couldn't cope with anything more. But no, we did say, I can't remember what it was. We watched a film about 6 months ago. I was like, I can't remember the last time we watched a film in the evening, because we just had never had the time. And when he sort of was in bed and asleep at an acceptable time, that was an anomaly. That was a treat.
Right.
And that has only recently changed. But aside from the eczema, he's always been a good sleeper. So you kind of know when he was really uncomfortable with it, because he would sleep really well if he was at peace and not being too severely affected. I think going back to sort of Sanjay, I didn't see it like that really, that me taking a lot of the strain. I think we've had heated discussions, shall we say, about the mental load of managing what creams are needed when, and things like that.
How much have you got in stock and that kind of thing.
And when you need to order repeat prescriptions.
I think sometimes, if you're on your own, then it's hard for you to judge, like, what is the amplitude of your own emotions? Am I overreacting to this? I think you could reasonably ask yourself that. And
and am I asking the right questions?
It sounds like you probably weren't, given how badly off he was with the eczema. So for any parents that could be listening to this who have a child who's got eczema to any degree, they might be feeling like, oh my goodness, I feel so alone with this, especially the parents of children who have it quite severely as well. What sort of things would you have liked to have heard yourself when you were going through that?
So first of all, I think more than anything, we would never say that we have all the answers. I don't think anybody does, to be honest. It's almost a case of, if you've got support and you've got someone who can listen, and someone, just the knowledge that you're not alone. Everyone has their own story with eczema. So those people affected by it might be a slightly different story, but there's loads of people in the same boat who have just a slightly different problem to yours. Look, we know there's no cure. If if there's a cure for it, that would be great. We know there isn't. Just know that there's people who understand out there that you can talk to.
And don't be afraid to seek that out.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't even hear about the National Eczema Society until, was it 3 years ago? Again, because of Katie's social media presence. I'd never heard of them. I think if we had known about it at the time Sachin was severely affected when he was first born, the first 2 years particularly, I know we would have had so much more support.
Yeah,
you could have called the helpline. Yeah, for sure.
All the online resources as well.
Yes, and it's really important. I think when we're sort of mentioning several times, like, it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah,
I have, again, in my relentless quest to make Sachin's life a bit easier, there's a lot of advice out there. There's a lot of conflicting advice, and none of it's wrong, but you need to take those bits that, take on board what the medical professionals are telling you, but apply it to your own experience as well. There's a lot of people like ourselves that have dealt with it for years, and how I would frame it to somebody who asked me what to do with a child with eczema, like, well, this is my experience.
Yes.
By all means, try it, but it might not have the same sort of results.
Which I think takes some of the pressure off, actually. Because I think if you say to somebody like, oh, you should try this,
and it doesn't work.
Shower gel
exactly.
or emollient.
Or cream or, yes, absolutely. And then it doesn't work. You think, well, what do I do now then?
Yeah.
it is there are a wealth of things out there that might. Eczema is a very unpredictable condition. There are a wealth of things out there that might help, and I'm not suggesting you go and buy the whole of Boots or anything like that. But just find any help and support that you can, whether it's emotional support or financial support. Or
I think it can be quite a difficult thing sometimes, can't it, to sort of go to whoever, the pharmacist or your doctor or something, and say, look, these are the problems that I'm experiencing. I feel sure that there must be some kind of help. I don't know what to ask for.
Yeah, be inquisitive and ask. And go back if it's not quite right. The thing that worked for us was finding a doctor that would explain how eczema worked to us so we could apply it to our own situation. Previously to that, I would feel like I'd go and see a doctor and they say, right, try this. And that might not work. Or it might work more, it might work better than we had anticipated. So 2 weeks down the line, I'd be in a new situation. I think, well, I need to go to the doctor again. And then it'd be 3-week wait for an appointment. Oh. And it's so dramatic, the eczema. I think, right, what do I do in the meantime? So, yeah, ask the questions. Feel empowered to know that you can manage it on your own a little bit if you are waiting for those appointments and things as well. So that was really important for me to feel like I was not making it worse in that period, sort of waiting for the next appointment. Just feeling empowered to know what you're dealing with. Yeah, really.
Well, I'm very delighted to say that at this point in the podcast, we have a special guest, the man of the moment. It is Sachin himself, who has joined us in the podcast studio after a lovely nap. It's so lovely to see you, Sachin. Hello.
Hello.
Would you mind telling all of our listeners, how old are you?
6.
You're 6. What a big boy. And you're here because you've got eczema. Mummy and Daddy have been talking about it. Your eczema's quite a lot better right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've only got a little bit of eczema, but what's the worst thing about having it?
When you sometimes scratch near it, it sometimes gets really itchy.
Oh, yeah. That must be really, really painful sometimes. Yeah. Mummy and Daddy have been saying that you deal with it very well and you're very brave.
It's been quite hard for you, hasn't it? Yeah. You want to tell Catherine what's the worst bit, you think?
Sometimes when I go in water, it stings a bit.
Oh, that can't be fun. What about when you're on holiday?
Only sometimes when I go.
Oh, and do you like swimming?
Yeah. It usually hurts in the sea.
Oh dear, that must make you sad.
And what about applying all your creams and stuff? What's that like for you?
It helps.
It helps you, doesn't it? So you know that they're very good for you, but it can be a little bit annoying, can't it? Because you have to keep remembering, don't you?
Do you have any friends who have eczema?
No.
What do you say to your friends at school if they ask about it?
I don't know.
No. Okay.
I don't think it gets much
curiosity.
And because it has got a lot better in the last few. I mean, you'll see his face now. It's not evident at all.
Not at all, no.
We're fortunate in a way that, and when he does get it, he's not very self-conscious about it. So, I guess we cross that bridge when we come to it. If he does get asked questions, it has crossed my mind how we sort of manage that. And if he asks me how he manages it, I still don't have the answer at the moment. So we'll try and figure that out if and when it happens.
And there might be other parents with children a little bit older who might give you advice.
Yes, hopefully, maybe.
Yes. Do you think if there was another child sitting at school who had eczema, do you think you'd be able to help them?
A bit.
Yeah, because you know what works for you and how you've dealt with it, haven't you? So you might be able to help them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be very helpful. That'd be a very kind thing to do. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Sachin. It's been lovely to have you joining Mummy and Daddy on this podcast. Is there anything else that you two would like to say, Katie and Sanjay?
I guess just don't give up hope, which sounds like a big cliche, but it's really overwhelming. It really is. When particularly a smaller child has eczema, it's very overwhelming. You get through it, and there is help out there. There is support out there, and don't. And if this sort of us talking about it helps somebody to explain it to other people or maybe understand it a bit better themselves, then, well, that's our job done here, really.
Absolutely. Katie summed it up really well. We would never pretend to know all the answers. I think if anything, for me, if it's helped someone today by us talking about it, I think, we've achieved what we want to, really. And it's such a good cause, the National Eczema Society. I mean, like I say, if we'd known about them earlier, we would have known that we've had so much more support then. So if it supports people now, and lets them, deal better with the sort of things we did when Sachin, particularly when he was 1 year and 2 years old, then yeah, for sure, I'd be more than happy to do this again.
Well then, Katie, Sanjay, and of course Sachin, thank you so much for coming along and sharing your story with us today. And thanks as well to you for listening to or watching this podcast. We'd love for you to follow and subscribe to the series and to rate and review it if you have a couple of minutes to spare. You can find so much more information on the National Eczema Society's website at eczema.org. That's ECZEMA.org. If you have any questions at all, and there's no such thing as a silly question, you can contact info@eczema.org. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook and X, formerly known as Twitter, or follow our campaign on #MoreThanJustAnItch. In our next episode, we'll be exploring the connection between eczema and mental health. Our dermatology professionals will be back, shedding some light on the emotional toll eczema can take. We'll be looking at psychodermatology, mindfulness techniques, and various other self-help options that you can use to support your mental health and emotional well-being. I'm Catherine Nicholson, and until then, goodbye.